we see horrific videos coming out of Nigeria. 30 Christians are being murdered a day.
Thousands upon thousands of Christians, men, women, and children have been murdered, martyred.
Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter.
It is a genocide.
This has been in the news because of Bill Maher, of all people.
They are systematically killing the Christians in Nigeria. They've killed over 100,000 since 2009. They are literally attempting to wipe out the Christian population.
Where do you think this Islamism in Africa comes from? Why is it such a big problem today?
The present government is confused, weak. This is also exponentially happening across Africa, and it's barely on our screens. Wherever Muslims are in the majority, Christians are second-class citizens. Always, everywhere.
So what's happening in Iraq then today? How are Christians being persecuted?
ISIS gave them the choice: convert, leave, or die. We, as Christians, can most certainly live in peace with Islam. The question is, can Islam live in peace with us?
Father Benedict Kiely, thank you so much for coming to speak with me. You are one of the, if not the world's most outspoken, I guess, journalist, but certainly member of the church, speaking about the persecution of Christians around the world. And Christians are the most persecuted group in the world. 380 million Christians worldwide face high or extreme persecution. We see horrific videos coming out of, at the moment, Nigeria, which we're going to look into, as some say, that 30 Christians are being murdered a day. Nigeria has been in the news because of Bill Maher. I'll come back to that. And I'm going to ask you about the persecution of Christians even here in Europe, not just in the UK, where we've seen various arson attacks on churches. But I'm interested to know if you have insight about the Muslim majority countries in Europe, but also you've been doing a lot of work in the Middle East. So actually, perhaps I might start with that. You've done a lot of work with giving aid to persecuted Christians, mostly in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Have I understood that right?
Yes. So now in 6 countries, actually. But yeah, those are the first ones.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming to speak with me. I wonder if we start with Nigeria then. So this has been in the news because of Bill Maher, of all people. I mean, famous atheist, new atheist, and I've met him. He's a lovely bloke, but quite striking to see him get so angry, saying 100,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria because they are Christian. 18,000 churches burned.
If you don't know what's going on in Nigeria, your media sources suck. You are in a bubble. And again, I'm not a Christian, but they are systematically killing the Christians in Nigeria. They've killed over 100,000 since 2009. They've burned 18,000 churches. This is so much more. These are their Islamists, Boko Haram. This is so much more of a genocide attempt than what is going on in Gaza. They are literally attempting to wipe out the Christian population of an entire country. Where are the kids protesting this?
Thank you. Because no one will talk about it, so thank you.
Absolutely.
It's Africa. That's why no one's talking about it, and they should be. You can't read about it in mainstream media. It's sad, so thank you for bringing it up.
Well, because the Jews aren't involved. That's why. It's the Christians and the Muslims. Who cares?
Now, of course, this is a population. It's about 50-50 Christian, Muslim, maybe slightly fewer Christians, but it's also the case that some people claim there's a genocide in Nigeria, and on the other hand, the Nigerian government themselves and Al Jazeera, who of course have sort of committed...
Always known for being a completely impartial organisation.
Yeah, exactly. They have debunked or claimed to debunk or attempted to debunk Bill Maher's claims, but we nonetheless see horrific videos coming out of Nigeria. And frankly, I don't know too much about what's going on there. So I wonder if you might enlighten me.
Well, thank you, Winston, for having me. Yes, that was very encouraging to see someone like Bill Maher speaking about it, and certainly the issues suddenly become prominent, whereas for years we've been talking about this slaughter. He's completely correct. Thousands upon thousands of Christians, men, women, and children have been murdered, martyred in Nigeria over many, many years. Usually, it's the figure is being given about 5,000 a year. And we've seen nothing. We've seen no marches. There's been no Black Lives Matter because they're Black Christian lives, so they obviously don't matter. There's no sort of je suis Nigerian Christian, nothing. It's been virtually off all the mainstream media. It is it is a genocide. It's reaching all the categories of genocide, because genocide is attempting to wipe out a population, an ethnic group, a tribe, and the Muslim majority, or the Muslim raiders, the Fulanis, various other groups have been driving Christians out. There's been an attempt, and it's at least 20 years, to say, which is complete nonsense, that it's climate change. Even politicians, it's sort of accepted narrative that this is climate change. The herdsmen, as they're called, because of climate change, are going into Christian areas because they can't feed their cattle in their own areas because of climate change. So they're just driving the Christians out because of climate change. I have a terrible story. You might remember a couple of years ago, although again, it was hardly reported on the BBC or any channel. I was actually waiting for it to be reported the night it happened. 2 years ago, on Pentecost Sunday, 2022, about 40 men, women, and children, Catholics, were murdered at Mass on Pentecost Sunday. And I was at a gathering just a few months later with the bishop of that diocese, the Diocese of Ondo in Nigeria. The Irish president, Michael Higgins, who's a little fellow with obviously a fairly little brain, had said in his letter of condolence that this was because of climate change. And I was with this bishop, who went to his church a few hours later and was telling us he was wading through blood. And his eyes were flaming when he was telling the story. He said, "My people were not murdered because of climate change. They were murdered because they were Christians. That is the only reason. Climate change there may be a factor in this, but it is principally anti-Christian. Men, women, and children, as I said, being martyred, hacked to death, burnt to death. And thank God someone like Bill Maher, who hasn't got any skin in the game really, raises this issue, because we hear so much about genocide in other places. And as I think he said, here's somewhere where a real genocide is happening, and no one's doing anything about it.
So it might be worth just painting a picture of what is going on. So this is Islamist groups who are if it's not climate change, it's Islamist groups who what are they trying to conquer land, or are they targeting Christians because of the very fact that they're Christians with no other motivation?
It's both. They are taking land, and it happens to be Christian land, and they're driving Christians out. But they go in and kill everyone or drive them out. There are, as you said, there are horrific videos of them attacking villages and things. There are thousands now of what are called IDPs, internally displaced persons, people who've been, they're not refugees, because you can't really be a refugee in your own country, but they've been driven, internally displaced from one area into camps. And they are, this, as I said, has been going on for many, many years. But this is also exponentially happening across Africa. We hear about ISIS was defeated to a certain extent in parts of the Middle East, but ISIS, or its namesake, or ISIS is just a name, Islamist, jihadi extremists are growing across Africa, all around Nigeria, Niger, above, Chad, Mali, these places, Mozambique, all across Africa. They are growing, they're massacring, they're getting very, very strong. And the world's attention, Africa seems to be, if it's not the Chinese trying to take over with its Belt and Road initiative, the other danger for so many parts of Africa now is Islamist extremism. And it's barely on our screens.
Sick of the lies and deception from the mainstream media? Regain control of your news with Ground News. Let's take a quick look at how the media is reporting on Trump's order to resume nuclear weapons testing. Left-leaning, Democracy Now! Around the headline, extraordinarily destabilizing decision, Trump denounced over call to immediately resume nuclear tests, while right-leaning Press TV led with, I had no choice. Trump orders US War Department to immediately resume nuclear weapons testing. Two very different narratives on the same story. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website helped me and my team cut through media bias and see the full picture. There are over 645 articles published on Trump's decision, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source context, lean ratings, and key breakdowns. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is essential to cutting through bias and actually being informed. That's why Ground News' blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are also supporting this show. We'll come back to the sort of more general points of it, but just on Nigeria, one of the arguments Al Jazeera are making, and if they're committed to anything, it's inverting the truth, but they are saying that these groups like Boko Haram in Nigeria are killing Muslims just as much as they're killing Christians. And they're not actually targeting these people because they're Christians. They're targeting them because they're in their way. They're against what they're trying to achieve. And it is true, right, that they're also killing other Muslims.
Yes, it's true. Muslims are being killed. But for example, as I mentioned, that massacre in the church, why go in and kill all the people in a church on a Sunday? They're not going into a mosque and killing everyone on a Friday. This is targeted. If there were small incidents or isolated incidents, but this is year in and year out for many, many years and getting worse and worse and worse. And the Nigerian government has obviously a big stake in. They're spending a lot of money. They've got a lot of lobbyists in places like DC now trying to spread the narrative that this isn't about Christians, this has other reasons, but it's not. It's the principal cause is Islamist violence against Christians. Innocent Muslims get killed as well, sadly.
What's been the Nigerian government's attitude towards Boko Haram? I'll be totally honest, it's not a country I know very much about. So what exactly are they, what is the broader conflict that's going on in Nigeria?
Well, it's not just Boko Haram. It is, as I said, various other Islamist groups now, Islamist groups that were declared loyalty to ISIS, have declared loyalty to Al-Qaeda. They have a number of different names, but they're all under that umbrella of Islamist extremism, jihadi extremism. And the previous Nigerian government received a lot of criticism for not cracking down on this. There's so many divisions in Nigeria as well. There are tribal divisions, ethnic divisions as well. This all always plays into this. In that sense, it's not 100% cut and dried, but it is 100% cut and dried that Christians in the majority are being killed as opposed to others. The present government is confused, weak. Nigeria, it's to do with the way many of these African countries were created by. I mean, I'm a big fan of colonialism in one way, but we did make a lot of mistakes cutting across tribal boundaries and things like that, and so this plays into other countries as well. My issue, particularly with Washington, with America, and with Britain, this country, is trade and aid. We've got to withhold and hold the government to account when we give thousands or millions and also arms sales. These are things we can practically do to say, but as it's just sort of becoming talked about, meanwhile thousands of people are being killed.
So you mentioned that sort of Africa more broadly. It does seem that of all of the countries at the top of the list of the sort of watch list for Christian persecution, the vast majority, it looks like it's Islamist on Christian attacks. But actually, even closer still, it is largely Africa: Somalia, Yemen, Libya. You mentioned Mozambique. Now, Sudan is a majority, overwhelmingly majority Muslim country. It's like 98% Sunni Muslim, but there are Christians being persecuted there. Before we go and look into some of these different countries, I think you might have been about to make a broader point about Islamism in Africa, or if not, where do you think this Islamism in Africa comes from? Why is it such a big problem today?
It's part of the growth over the last 20 or 30 years. It's come from people like ISIS. ISIS inspired so many organizations, groups to declare their loyalty. Al-Qaeda. I read a report, I think it was today, that the country of Mali is in great danger. The capital is in great danger of falling to Al-Qaeda, not ISIS, another group, which would be the first country that's actually fallen to such a group. Where's it come from? We can trace it, again, going much further back. We can trace it back to that whole Wahhabi, Saudi extremism that was under the previous Saudi leaders, was being spread across the world. That's why, for example, in Pakistan, there's such extremism. Other countries in the Middle East, we can name some of them that are well. Let's name them. The Qatar, that's well known as being a supporter, a financer of Hamas, of Hezbollah. This is all being fed from all these different sources. The one thing I would say to step back is, and it's useful to bear it in mind. When I first went to Iraq in 2015. ISIS was just down the road. There were thousands of Christian refugee IDPs, again had been driven from their ancient homeland. But a lady who was helping me there said, "You got to forget everything you think you know or knew. It's very complicated." So when someone comes in and gives you extremely clear reasons for everything, be suspicious, and be suspicious as well of everything you read on the internet, because a lot of people make a lot of points without knowing fact. And that's not an excuse, but it is extremely complicated. But there are things you can pick out. Obviously, if a majority of Christians are being killed, someone's doing it and there's a reason behind it. But some of the forces and things that feed into this, and who's backing them and why, you bring in even the superpowers, who's backing who, and trade, minerals. There are just so many things behind this. But at the core, we could go back to one of your previous guests on this show, Raymond Ibrahim, and you talk about the 1400-year battle that we've had as Christians with Islam. I know we're not meant to sort of say that, but this is just a historical fact that for 1400 years Islam has conquered. It's a religion of conquering, and Christians have suffered back and forth for 1400 years, and they're suffering again.
Yeah, well, Raymond made the point that, from 100 years from the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, within 100 years, you have Muslims up in Tours in the middle of France. They're defeated there by Charles Martel. And but all of the Middle East and North Africa was Christian before then, and within a century was converted to Islam, or put under the boot of Islamic overlords
forever. Wherever now Muslims are in the majority, Christians are always second-class citizens. It doesn't mean they're being killed or, in a sense, actively persecuted, but wherever Muslims are in the majority, Christians are second-class citizens. Always. Everywhere. There's no country that is a Muslim majority where Christians are not. The only places where they were equal, which again is very controversial, and it doesn't mean these people were good, was under the strongmen, the dictators in places like Iraq and Syria, the Saddams and the Assads. Not saying they're good people, far from it, but they were in essence secular republics, and so there wasn't that kind of violence between Christians and Muslims. In fact, most of the time they lived in peace. And I know, again, from my own experience, one of the things we have to do is say what, as the Bible says, what we've seen and heard. Whether it's controversial or not, or whether people agree with you or not, you have to say what you've seen and heard. And certainly in Iraq and Syria, people often say, well, we need another strongman again. I've heard it said in Iraq many times, we need another Saddam. Now, no one pretends Saddam was a good man, but he kept the peace. They were not killing each other. From 2003, I know we're jumping ahead to the Middle East, but
he killed quite a lot of people.
Well, he did. But it's worth bearing in mind, again, that after the invasion, the Allied invasion of Iraq in 2003, that's when all the killing began. That's when, because society broke apart, and people think it all started in 2014 with ISIS. But no, well before that, Christians were being kidnapped, murdered, their lives, they were being driven out of Mosul, for example. This was all before ISIS. And then ISIS just made it even worse. It's always, is it bad? A priest said to me one time in Iraq, when I talked about Saddam's time, he said, there's bad or worse. Which would you like to live under? And I said, well, obviously bad. That's the point. It's bad. Now it's much worse. And the same thing in Africa. If there's a strong man, he may be brutal. There may not be what we call freedom in the West, but at least if two groups are not killing each other, I'd rather live under that regime than another one.
So what's happening in Iraq then today? How are Christians being persecuted? I was actually at a church in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan, and it was an absolutely wonderful experience. Obviously, the mass was all in Arabic and with a little bit of Aramaic.
Yes, exactly.
And it was quite special. I could just about keep along, even though I don't speak very much Arabic, I could just about keep along with the kind of the normal traditions of a church service. But I didn't know that Christians are still being killed in Iraq.
At the moment, they're not being killed. I mean, I've been going to Iraq since 2015, when they were very much being killed by ISIS. They were all driven out of their ancient homeland in it's not Kurdistan. They fled into Kurdistan from Nineveh, the Nineveh plain. Nineveh is, of course, where Jonah the prophet preached in the Bible. Nineveh is the city of Mosul. The tomb of Jonah was in Mosul. ISIS blew it up. I've seen it. All the Christians were driven out of the Nineveh plain, where they've lived for 2,000 years. This is the point again. Middle Eastern Christianity is... Sometimes when I'm in America, in particular, they say, "Well, when did we bring the gospel to these people?" It's the other way around. They brought the gospel to us. Now, basically, the problem in Iraq now is the Shia militias. ISIS was Sunni. The Shias fought with Christians against ISIS and liberated them from that. But the Shia militias now, who are all controlled by Iran, they are now on the Nineveh plain. They have the power. They're surrounding the Christian villages. They're not killing them, but they are, a bishop said to me, it's a silent persecution. They're pushing them out demographically. They're buying the land. They're making life uncomfortable. They're taking over all the councils of the towns. And as I said, they are also just, the fact is you're a second-class citizen in Iraq. You don't have the same rights as a Muslim. And so many of them want to leave because life is not active persecution, but they always worry, is it going to happen again? ISIS is reviving again. So it's always unsteady. And yet, as you said, it's a beautiful thing to go there and to see Christians who've been there from the beginning, who are not just worshipping in Aramaic. The wonderful thing is in Iraq and certain parts of Syria, they still speak Aramaic. I heard a friend of mine once on the cell phone, and I knew it wasn't Arabic he was talking. And I said, what language are you talking? He said, Aramaic, as though What do you think?
Yeah.
I said, that's the language of Jesus, which is incredible. And they have, they believe in their faith. ISIS gave them the choice, convert, leave, or die. That was the choice. And so thousands and thousands of them, men, women, and children, left in the night in August of 2014 with basically only the clothes they were wearing, because they would not betray their ancient faith. ISIS marked, I have the Nun, the Arabic N, ISIS marked the houses with the Nun, the Arabic N, because that meant Christian, Nazarene Christian. I've seen it on the walls in Mosul.
You've got it on your lapel.
On my lapel pin, yeah.
I remember seeing Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, had it on her Twitter handle for some time before she's taking it down.
But people think, again, that was just ISIS invented that. No, it's the mark. It's been for centuries. Islam has marked the non-believer, both the Star of David for the Jew, but the Nun. And this mark, I saw one on a wall in Mosul. It said the Nun was there, Christian, and then it said property of the Islamic State. It was a church, which they blew up. So Christians have this anxiety. There have been these waves of persecution since the time of Islam conquering, then a period of quiet, then persecution again. But they will not leave. If they can, they will stay. But that the numbers are down dramatically from maybe 2 million, 1.5 million before the 2003 war. Now there are less than 200,000 Christians in Iraq, the whole of Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah, if the World Wildlife Fund has categories for animals, extinction levels, the Christians in Iraq now are at the level just below the extinction level, the sort of most endangered. Yet we worry about endangered frogs and insects. And if you're a Christian, here are our brothers and sisters who are in great danger. And once again, we do so little for them.
Yeah, wow. In the news over the last year has been, of course, Syria, not just because Assad has been deposed or fled to Russia, but also because Giuliani, a former Islamist, has taken power, and there's a new order or disorder maybe would be appropriate. It's not quite clear at this moment. There's a bit of fog about what's going on in Syria, but I know you've worked there. I know you have sources there. We've touched on this a little bit on the show. We've had mixed reports, some saying there's not much going on in Syria. I think I even spoke to Raymond about this. It's not entirely clear that there's targeted mass attacks on Christians, but perhaps you can enlighten me.
Disorder is the right word, Winston. I think that first, the man himself, al-Giuliani, was an Al-Qaeda operative. Had I think a $10 million bounty from the U.S. government that's only just been lifted. Yes, he's wearing a suit now. He's cut his beard. The question many people would say is, does a Islamist leopard change his spots? They have control of Damascus and various other parts of Syria. Syria is fragmented now terribly. I mean, this is the point. Disorder is the right word. There are still sections. When I talked about ISIS growing, ISIS is really reforming in parts of Syria now. There are criminal gangs. You're correct. I think from what I've heard from people I've spoken to, there's been no actual mass targeting of Christians. There has been, as we know, mass slaughter of the Alawites, which was of course Bashar al-Assad's tribe,
which is a Muslim minority group.
Thousands were killed, the Druze as well. But Christians have also been killed. They've been kidnapped. There've been attacks on churches again. It's hard to know. What I do know is that the Christians are very nervous. I spoke just in the last couple of weeks with two Christians from Syria, one who was there during the time of the fall of Assad, and he said it was apocalyptic. Another said, they both said, Giuliani's very bad. They said he's very bad. He may be better than some other alternatives, but he's very bad. He may be trying to create some conditions of stability. Basically, the jury's out with what's going to happen there, but it's not all the Christians, again, are very, very nervous. This is the problem, and when you're nervous, they want to leave. People were actually returning, and this is not, again, being an apologist for Assad at all. A friend of mine once said, who knows that world, again, very well, he said, they're all monsters. You just have to decide which monster you're going to work with. And we know that. That's realpolitik. We work with some monsters quite happily and shake their hand, and they're doing some pretty awful things. So Assad, there's no apology for Assad, but people were returning to the areas where the government, the then government, was winning, and there was some stability. I was in Syria in 2019 in Damascus, and Christians were, it was very poor because, of course, the economic sanctions were still on, and the people were suffering, not the Assad regime. The people were suffering. But they're very nervous about what's going to happen because when one group, they used to say first the Alawites and the Christians. So like the attacks on the Jews, first the Friday people, the Saturday people, and then the Sunday people. There's a sort of level. I saw an interview once, several years ago, in Lebanon about a warlord was talking about an Alawite village, and he said, if Bashar al-Assad falls, everyone in that village will be killed in 2 hours. He was going to do it himself. He was going to lead them. But then after that, it's the Christians. So we have to pray and hope that if sanctions are lifted, if there's economic revival in Syria, but once again, talk about complicated. The involvement of Israel, the involvement of the Russians, the involvement of the Iranians, it's so complicated. You just have to sort of take it down to the level of ordinary people. I think perhaps the audience can understand that best when you think of your family, your children, and do you want to live somewhere where, at least in theory, you can have a job and not disturb anyone, no one disturbs you, and just live in peace? And for so many, that's just not possible.
Yeah, I think that's, perhaps it's a side point, but there's a progressive fallacy that everyone just wants to live in peace and that all they want is to have their families and do their jobs and have healthy, long lives. I think that this is a great fallacy. I don't think this is like abundantly clear. And listening to you already and people who know these regions, like Islamists don't want those things. On the contrary, they want death. And actually, the fallacy is so ridiculous is even within Christian countries of the West, we don't all want the same things. Not all people want those. Some people actually want destruction and the end. So this is a sort of a great. I think this is the great maneuvering. The people who don't want those things realize that progressives want those things and are able to subvert the West in this.
Well, that's a whole
other conversation, perhaps.
Including the very phrase you used, the Christian countries of the West. Where are they? Where are the Christian countries of the West now? Christian, nominally Christian, but do we have Christian countries in the West? A whole other discussion. But no, you're completely right. And there's a very interesting development that in France, they call Islamo-Gauchism, this peculiar marriage, a marriage made in hell between Islamists and the left, which is also growing in this country. This creation of these new parties, the Islamist MPs mixing with Corbyn's new party, and The Spectator had a very good piece a week or two ago about this really serious danger of a very left Islamist kind of group growing in Britain. So we're in for some tough times.
I'll come back to Britain, but just sticking with the rest of the world and persecution of Christians elsewhere, we were coming back to Africa just one last time. So Sudan, which I mentioned and described already a little bit, there is information going out on the internet saying that Christians are being persecuted here. As I mentioned, there are some who are being persecuted, but most of the footage we're seeing in Sudan that is Muslim on Muslim attacks. Am I right in understanding
Correct.
that?
Yes. Yeah. Once again, it's very, very complicated, but it appears that, yes, Christians are all, they're sort of the fall guys, as it were. Wherever there's conflict, Christians unfortunately end up suffering. They're an easy scapegoat as well. But the essence of this Sudan conflict is Muslim on Muslim. It's the two groups, the government group and the so-called rebel group, which was a creation in itself of the previous government when the war was going on in Darfur, and then the creation of South Sudan, where there are
which is majority Christian.
Yes. So the present conflict, which is horrible, I mean, true slaughter again, unfortunately, is essentially civil war between these two groups, one less Islamist, one more Islamist. They're both Islamists, and it's also tribal, ethnic divisions. It's also very much to do with Arabist movement, that the government, for example, is considered to be more Arabist than the group, the RSF, the other the rebel group, because again in Sudan.
But they're not Arabs, are they?
Well, there's a whole thing to do with the darker tribes, as in very African, as opposed to a more Arabist look and an Arabist mentality. So there's a class thing going on as well. There's the alleged involvement of the UAE, who are supporting the rebels, the Janjaweed, as they were called. That apparently, I was briefed by a very knowledgeable person about this just the other day, a former ambassador. The UAE's involvement is to try to not have an Islamist state. They're actually opposed to the idea of an Islamist state. The government is more Islamist. So one of the things this friend of mine told me is that they're both bad guys. This is the problem. It'd be easy to say they're bad and they're good. They're both terrible. They'll both slaughter each other if they can. They'll both do what's, at the moment, the rebels are doing in this town where at least 2,000 people apparently have just been killed. But the government would do the same thing. But it is not, and I would fight to the death if it was Christian persecution, but the internet is full of pictures and stories, and people are talking about Christian persecution and saying that these people are all Christians. It's not. Both sides are spending a lot of money, putting out a lot of material. Christians are, as I said, the fall guys, and some are being killed. But it is principally Muslim on Muslim violence.
Sudan's an interesting one as well, because they are one of the signatories of the Abraham Accords, and they actually signed it just near the end of Trump's first term, one of 5 countries, Muslim-majority countries, that signed the peace treaties, or the naturalization treaties with Israel, which America brokered. So it's a country that it's sort of teetering on right in the middle of this geopolitical, mess with these. And the Saudis are also back in the opposite side from the Emiratis. It's kind of...
Iran is involved. Yeah. And of course, Sudan, which is a huge country, I didn't realize until the division with South Sudan. Sudan was the size of Western Europe. Enormous country. All these different players. But once again, we're back to remembering our history. The Nubians, for example, in early Christianity were Christian. There was a lot of Christians, Christian Nubian nations in what is now Sudan. Then, when Islam swept in, and really right up until the 19th century, there was this Islamization, and again, a very... not politically correct point, but I don't think you want political correctness on this show.
You certainly do not.
When was Sudan in the best shape in the last, say, 500 years or 300 years? When the British were in charge, when the colonial powers were in charge, they were well run. My friend the ambassador was telling me when he was stationed there in the 80s, He talked to some old men who remembered from the 40s when people like Wilfred Thesiger were in the colonial service running things. That was when the people were quite safe. I know it's not a popular thing to say, but colonialism wasn't all bad.
Yeah. As well, good on you for saying the politically incorrect thing. It wasn't all good either,
No,
but
we have to say that.
We have to say that, but it's obviously true as well. But there are plenty of places where it's good, and away from the sort of Muslim world, look at the clear examples for me are Singapore and Hong Kong, which just become sort of little spots of prosperity, which wouldn't have existed without the British. But that's colonization is another show, of course. So let's look back at Christians being persecuted. Now, I do want to come back to our country, Britain, but I thought I would ask you about if you knew anything about what's going on in the three Muslim majority countries of Britain: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. I don't know necessarily that there's anything troubling going on, but I do know that historically, obviously, it goes without saying, there's been great trouble in the region. And I wonder if you had any insight there.
I haven't been to Bosnia and I haven't been to Kosovo. I have been to Albania and have actually a great interest in Albania, as you know, and the listeners know probably that Albania was the most oppressive country under communism. It was the only country, the first officially atheist state in the world. The dictator Enver Hoxha declared, I think it was in 1967, the church was relentlessly persecuted, horrendously persecuted. All church buildings were closed, many of them were destroyed, and there's been a really beautiful resurgence of the faith. I learnt the other day that actually now Christians have overtaken Muslims. There were always good relations in Albania because they were all persecuted, although the Christian church was more heavily persecuted than Islam. But there are good relations and still good relations. For example, a bill just got knocked out of the Albanian parliament. There was an attempt to bring in an extreme sort of LGBTQ bill, and
there's a new way to unite the sons and daughters of Abraham.
Exactly.
It's through trans ideology.
And they worked together, the churches and Muslim authorities worked together, and that bill was defeated. So Albania now is a remarkable place. No real issues in that sense in terms of persecution, but the resurgence of the church is a beautiful story. I was in Shkodra, which was the part of Albania where there were more Christians. Hoxha had closed the cathedral, had turned it into a gymnasium, a sports hall. I was there for Easter several years ago, and I just went into the church for the Good Friday service. And one of my prayers had been, I wanted to meet one of what they call the white martyrs, the people hadn't been killed, but had gone to prison or whatever for their faith. And just before the service began, an old priest walked in and sat down in front of me, white hair and everything. So I kind of presumed. After the service, I spoke to a young lady who spoke perfect English. And I said, "Can you ask Father if I can talk to him?" And we had a little conversation. And I said to him, "Father, did you suffer under communism?" And he said, "Yeah, I was in prison for 14 years. What did you do?" He said, "Well, I hid the vessels for Mass, the chalice and the paten, and went to prison for 14 years. I said, "Father, how did you survive?" And he just kind of pointed like, "God looked after me." But it's a beautiful thing.
Wow.
If you want to read some horrific stuff, read how people were tortured. They went back sort of the first years of Christianity, the kind of horrific tortures in the Colosseum that they did to these men and women and children. It was really, the scriptures were true when in the Gospels Jesus said, brother will betray brother, and even children betrayed their parents in Albania. It was the most surveilled, as the Americans say. It was the most surveilled country in the world at that time. I think probably North Korea or Britain maybe is now. But 1 in 3 people in Albania was an informer. They had listening devices and all. It was oppressively totalitarian place. And yet this is a great sign of hope, because we've had a whole show so far of kind of maybe a bit depressing, but it's a great sign of hope to know that from the sort of the ashes, in Christianity, the phoenix always rises, obviously. Out of the ashes, the fire is reformed again. And Chesterton said, many, many times it's appeared like Christianity has gone to the dogs, and he always said, it's always the dog that died, because Christianity comes back. Napoleon said, Christianity is dead, I've defeated it. Hitler said, I've defeated it. None of them have defeated it, which is very hopeful.
So what's happened in Albania? As you're speaking, I'm trying to think of when countries that were once Christian but became Muslim, when they've become Christian again, let's say Spain or parts of Italy, France, the areas that the Ottomans ruled, it was actually usually by force that it would become Christian again, or when the Crusaders retook the Holy Land. In Albania, presumably it's not by force. This is a natural
growth. The liberation when 1989-90, it was slightly later in Albania after the fall of the Berlin Wall, but people emerged because, as I said, I don't think people realized that there were no churches open. There was no religious freedom. But priests emerged from the catacombs, effectively, who'd been in camps, and nuns, all of these people in secret began to emerge, and slowly the church was rebuilt. And I think it's because, again, there's another show, another story of the revival in the East, of when you've had 40 or 50 years of that kind of oppression. First and foremost, people don't want to be dictated to by any other body. For example, I was just in Kazakhstan, which was a giant gulag. Stalin sent about 1.5 million people to Kazakhstan, and I was talking to the bishop there, who was born in a gulag, who was confirmed by a martyr priest. His family were persecuted Christians, and he wasn't politically correct either. He said Europe is the EU. He said is the new Soviet Union. He said, but it's interesting. The point is, these former communist countries do not want to be dictated to by an outside force, because they've lived being dictated to by an outside force. But also, there's a tremendous hunger when there's been that level of oppression, atheistic oppression, that desire for truth and for authenticity is what's there's some very
so that's part of the answer, but for me it doesn't quite satisfy me, because that was some decades ago, and so you have a country that is slightly majority Muslim. It's very peculiar for it to become Christian. So what you're explaining might explain why there's a faith on both sides coming up. But why is it now the Christians are overtaking the Muslims?
There are practical reasons, like things like providing social services and hospitals and things like that. But I think it's because there is a hunger for truth and for authenticity. And obviously I would say it, I'm a Christian, I'm Catholic, I believe. The truth will set you free. And when people are in search of the truth, who will provide the truth? As long as Christians are living the faith or in an authentic manner. And please God, that's what's happening in Albania in particular. I'm just, you asked me the question, and that's something that I do know a little bit about. Whereas we can say, for example, in Western Europe, why has the faith appeared to fade?
But sorry, is it Muslims converting to Christianity?
It's mainly people who had no practical faith.
Okay.
That's the point.
Right,
They may be Muslim background or Muslim ethnicity or tradition, and also not practicing Christians, people who had been Christian families, but it's now actually practicing and living the faith. Just beginning. I mean, this isn't some sort of massive explosion,
slow
but it's now that it appears that the number of Christians is now slightly above in theory, the number of Muslims.
Yes. Okay.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see how that pans out. So you were saying about Western Europe by comparison.
We call Hilaire Belloc, the great revisionist historian of the last century, speaking just after the First World War, actually talking about the rise of Islam, which was very, again, historically interesting. If you think the Ottoman Empire has just been defeated in the First World War, but Belloc was writing saying, it's going to rise again, be ready. And he actually said, our grandchildren, so he's writing in sort of 1919, the 20s, so he's talking about now. He said, our grandchildren will one day have to fight, which seemed crazy because it had been defeated. But one of the things Belloc said was, he said, the cement which kept civilization together, and he said, the Christian cement is crumbling all around us. Now, he's writing in the 20s. Well, jump ahead to where we are now in 2025. The cement, as we spoke earlier about, is there such a thing as Christian Europe? The cement has crumbled completely.
G.K. Chesterton was writing about the same period, and in his poem about King Alfred, he also makes the same sort of suggestion, which is that in the future, he was talking about the great heathen army, the Vikings,
The Ballad of the White Horse.
The Ballad of the White Horse, that's the piece, the poem. But he says, in the future, it will be people coming by the pen who will, it would be this sort of, implying the atheists who will be the great enemy. Is that a similar sort of point, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is back to that bizarre marriage of the left and Islam, that they're both the enemy. And again, one has to be very clear. I'm not saying all Muslims are the enemy. We can live in peace. We, as Christians, can most certainly live in peace with Islam. The question is, can Islam live in peace with us? But the Christian cement, and it's not a romantic vision of Christendom, but when Europe was Christian, there was some solidity, even though we fought each other, etc., etc. Now the progressive, atheistic, and essentially very, very secular mentality that exists in Europe across the board, across academia and the media, etc. What is the cement that holds that together? For example, whenever there's a terrorist attack, we always hear about British values or European values. What are these European values? Well, tolerance, we're told. So do we tolerate everything? What are values? Well, our values were once Christian values. Tom Holland, with his great book Dominion, was the real story. That the language, even of the left and of progressives, has had a Christian base. But if you a preacher greater than me once spoke about building a house on two foundations, the house built on sand and the house built on stone. And the Lord himself said, the house built on sand, the wind and the rain come and it crumbles because it has no foundation. Think of the European Union. Think of the constitution of the European Union. You're probably too young, but I remember when St. John Paul for Catholics was saying, you're trying to have a European constitution written that doesn't mention Christianity. That obstruction or denial of memory, denial of reality, that's a house built on sand. It can't stand. There's no foundation. And now we're in an age where, for Western Europe, it appears, what is our foundation now? These vague values are not enough to stand up to the assault of people who have a completely different set of values. Benedict XVI, again, a man of great vision and mind, he said, speaking of Europe, nature abhors a vacuum. We know that scientifically. Yeah. If there's a vacuum in Europe, what's going to fill it? I would say, of course, we must fill it now. We must be real Christians again. But there's another group that will want to fill it and are attracting many converts, and we know who they are.
You say earlier that Christians can live in peace with Muslims, but actually, if you look historically at what happened in Europe, if the Christians of Western Europe had remained peaceful, I think that they would be Muslims. I think they would have been converted by the sword. I think if you, this is, now it's me being politically incorrect, but if not for the, let's say, if you look at Andalusia and Spain and the reconquest of Spain by the Christian warriors, it would have remained under the overlordship of the Moors.
All for the Reconquista. There's no problems with that at all.
There's Crusades. It's amazing how the history of the Crusades has been taught for so long, because no one ever talks about what happened before the Crusades and how Christians were treated across Western Europe. So this kind of part of history and even the idea of just war. I mean, if not for just war, this is all well before America was discovered, which is of course all Christian now, but it could very well be, this is a counter narrative. It's not completely beyond the imagination that this would all be Muslim if, as you say, Christians had just...
You're completely correct. I mean, I'm talking now, but absolutely, you're completely correct. Let's remember, it may not be politically correct, but political correctness doesn't often have much to do with truth either. The Crusaders did bad things, we know that, but the Crusades were about the liberation of the holy places, the protection of Christians, as you said. The Reconquista was the same thing, to defeat the Islamic invaders. The great date that all Christians should celebrate with great joy is the Battle of Lepanto, October the 7th, 1470, when, without the divine intervention, turning back the Turkish fleet. So we would all probably be speaking Arabic. The point now, though, is we can live in peace with Muslims, say, for example, in our country, if they integrate, and if they don't. Unfortunately, America's much better at it, because there isn't that kind of ghettoization. So that's why I say we can live in peace with Islam. We can, from our side, unless there is that attempt to impose their religion on us. And then we can discuss, we can get into the whole issue of Sharia law and all this kind of stuff, which is a great danger now for Western Europe. Back to the cement. If there isn't our own strong culture, and we'll get attacked by all sorts of people that's racist. No, a pride and joy in our own culture and our own lifestyle. In America, the whole idea is a pluribus unum, out of many in one. One wag once said, there's too much pluribus and not enough unum now. We don't have that idea, but we do have, or did have, the idea that you come to this country, you assimilate, you become part of this country. If there is a desire to impose a completely alternative vision, okay, maybe we give up and everyone accepts that. And that's the essence of the novel by the French writer Houellebecq, Soumission, submission, that the French just sort of give up and they get taken over. From my perspective, I don't think it's just my opinion as a Catholic, is we're not able to do that. We can't do that. How can we let... there is only one true religion. Scary that a priest would say that, but there is only one true religion. We believe that Christianity, Christ is God the Son, the second person of the Holy Trinity. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Muhammad never said that. Buddha never said that. I am the truth. Not I am one of many truths. So either we believe that and fight for that, or we get taken over.
How do you think that the Christian church should deal with what I guess are technically Christian heresies? I mean, Islam is technically a Christian heresy from a Christian point of view.
Absolutely.
So then at the same time, you have leaders of the church of course, you've got to treat all humans like they're humans, but there's another step, which is to be celebrating parts of the Islamic calendar, and we have our king has said various things about Islam over the year. Now, as Christians, yes, we should welcome our fellow human beings. But what do you think is the correct position, or perhaps a different way of asking the question is: do you think the Church have made missteps with regards to talking about other faiths?
Of course, as I said earlier on, we have to speak the truth. It's biblical. We speak the truth in love. Caritas in veritate. It's straight from St. Paul. Speak the truth in love. Benedict XVI again said one of the important things about dialogue is speaking the truth. For example, we can still speak the truth to one another and say, I disagree completely with your point, or in my view, you're completely wrong. Doesn't mean we're going to kill each other or hate each other. Two anecdotes that illustrate this. When I was in Iraq one time, very early on, when ISIS was very dominant, I said to an archbishop in Iraq, can you have dialogue with moderate Islam? And he laughed and he said, well, when moderate Islam exists, we'll have dialogue with it. I also asked the same question to someone, I won't say who, but who was extremely high up in the church. When I say high, I mean very high. Not quite, not in white, but close. But and we'd been talking. He'd been very serious the whole discussion. He'd never smiled, and I asked him the same question. I said, "Can we have dialogue with moderate Islam?" And he laughed for the first time, and he said exactly the same thing. He said, "When it exists, we can have dialogue." So you were completely right about it being a Christian heresy. That's again something Belloc wrote about. Belloc was always fascinated though, because he said it's the one heresy that's endured. He found it fascinating that why would this one, he called it the great, the most extreme denial of the incarnation possible, which is true. That's what Islam can't accept, that Christ, God the Son, Jesus was God. So it's the most extreme denial. But he was always fascinated, how could it survive? But for example, dialogue with Islam, theologically, is pretty difficult, if not impossible. But we can work, as we were talking about Albania together, for example. The Vatican did a lot of work in the UN with Muslim countries fighting against some of the gender stuff. We can do a lot together in peace, happily, and we really should. But ISIS produced 2 magazines during their time in Iraq and Syria, one called Dabiq and one called Rumia, which is Rome. And in one of them, I can't remember which, they produced these glossy magazines, great PR and everything. One of the issues of one of them, I think it was Rumia, its issue was, I'm sure it was a big seller, it was called Why We Hate You. That was and the first several chapters or parts of this article were not, as you might expect, we hate you in the West because you're so corrupt and, your women don't wear enough clothing and all this. All the first points in this article were theological. We hate you because you believe in 3 gods. We hate you because you believe Jesus is God. We hate you because... all theological. So dialogue theologically on the part of the church has got to be realistic. Work together with the things you can work together with, as I said. But yeah, I think, unfortunately, many of our leaders have not. It's all about fudging and keeping appearances of peace. But that's why you have to go to some of these countries where people have really experienced what persecution is. And you don't hear the same kind of discussion. Mm-hmm. You just, because they know. They know what it's like to be driven out of their homes. I was in Iraq one time talking to a priest who'd been driven out of Mosul. He said, my 800-year-old church is an ISIS torture center. They're killing people and torturing, shooting people in this center. And he said, my house is taken by my neighbors. Now, that's not all Muslims. Of course it's not. But it's also reality. Don't play too many games. Let's talk with transparency, with honesty, and with charity. in truth and love, but also not fudging.
We've heard a lot in the press about, well, most recently, the very famous case of the synagogue in Manchester, the terrible Islamist attack by a Jihad al-Shami, a Syrian-born British citizen, and 2 Jews were killed in that attack. And actually, not long after, there was an attack on a mosque in Peacehaven. I believe it's in West Sussex, if I'm not mistaken. And all synagogues in the world, actually, but certainly in Britain, have armed guards outside of them. And it is the case that we hear, certainly in the mainstream media, attacks on mosques when they come up. What we don't hear about is attacks on churches. And those of us who are paying attention can see it. Occasionally pops up on social media that there are arson attacks. This year alone, I know there have been attacks in Market Drayton, Hartlepool, Lancashire on churches, but this isn't really reported. And I wondered if it's something that you've been following and what the sort of plight of Christians being persecuted in Britain, in the United Kingdom, of all places, looks like.
Britain and Europe, in France, there have been at least, I think, 5,000 attacks on churches in the last 5 to 10 years.
So, 1,000 a year, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, being burnt down. I'm not just talking about conspiracy theories about Notre Dame. We don't know anything about that, but churches that have been burnt down, martyrdoms of people in Nice, etc.
Oh, there's the Norman priest.
Father Jacques Hamel. Father Jacques Hamel martyred in 2015 by Islamists who cut his throat at Mass. And he, interestingly enough, said when they came towards him, he said, "Va, Satan," begone Satan. He knew who they were. But yeah, in England, Britain,
wow.
Across Europe, once again, it is not just Islamic violence against Christians. It is Antifa-style people, extreme left people attacking the church. But even if you sort of go to the next level, right as we speak, at this moment in Finland, Päivi Räisänen, a member of the Finnish, an MP, a former minister in the Finnish government, is on trial for the 3rd time, being defended by the great group, the ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, great lawyers. Päivi Räisänen is on trial for tweeting Bible verses.
What?
Yeah. Have you read about this much only on the internet and things like that do we get this story? It's never. I think GB News did one story on Päivi. She tweeted Bible verses about marriage between a man and a woman, and she also questioned a pride march in Finland. She's a Lutheran. She was tried by the government. They brought the case, acquitted. They brought the case again, acquitted. And they've for a 3rd time, and ADF have been saying, look, this is sort of like the canary in the coal mine of Europe. Potentially, the Bible will be seen to be a hate speech, a book of hate speech. She is being tried at this moment. So you go right up to that level, then down, take it down to sort of attacks, and this is what is going on in Europe now.
So wait, what was the Bible verse? Do you know?
It was to do, I don't know the exact verses, but I think it was probably from St. Paul's letter to the Romans about homosexuality, etc. But it's from the Bible. She wasn't sort of saying herself anti-gay or LGBT stuff. She was quoting the Bible, and then she said that it wasn't right to be having the Pride March. But that's... The point about the Bible quoting, though, is that's what she's also being tried for hate speech. So if she's found guilty, that means the Bible is a book of hate speech. And will we be allowed to quote the Bible in public? Well, we know in Britain, for example, we aren't. How many street preachers, not imams, by the way, it's funny, you never hear about any imams being arrested for any of their preaching. And let's remember, Islam has pretty much the same views about marriage as we do. But Christian street preachers are regularly being arrested now.
I'm going to have to pick you back up on the Islam and Christianity having the same views on marriage.
Well,
but
similar. But think of...
some pretty...
You can dig in, but,
yeah.
But my point is, as you know, I've seen you speak on American TV as well about the sort of non-hate crime and all this sort of stuff. Someone just has to say they're offended. If I'm preaching in the street and preaching with my Bible saying marriage is between a man and a woman, etc., not spewing hate, just preaching, someone just has to say, I'm offended by that. And I can be arrested. That's Britain. That's a reality.
Incident. Yeah.
It's a reality. Your point, I know what you're saying about Islam and Christianity. However, what I'm saying is that
well, specifically, if you read, I think it's chapter 4 of the Quran, which regards to women and how they are treated, it's not equivalent to what's going on in Christianity.
But you would have, for example, in many mosques or even, as say, street preachers, imams preaching in the street, pretty strong language about, for example, homosexuality.
Or maybe on the topic of homosexuality.
But you would not have them being arrested. But literally, again, they're on the internet. You see, and these aren't fake videos. These are often, funnily enough, African or people of African descent street preachers being abused by people, but the police coming up and saying so-and-so is offended. I saw one the other day, a young man, I think again of African descent, who was approached by the police and told he had to stop preaching because someone's offended. This is serious.
Yeah. What do we know about Antifa attacks? We've obviously spoken a lot now about Islam, but you mentioned in passing there have been far left attacks in Britain on churches. Can you give any example?
Well, I know more about France, that they know that it's often they are Islamist attacks, but they're also, because of that marriage we've talked about, of the left and Islam, there have been more documented attacks. In this country, I don't know. The reality, though, is that we have had a number of attacks, which, as you said, have not been reported. Who's done them? Well, I don't think they've caught many people either. So in a sense, the jury could be out on that. But someone who, put it this way, someone who hates Christianity for whatever reason, has been, people who hate Christianity have been doing these things. And there is that peculiar marriage, which is probably to do with the church being, in theory, at least the only institution that upholds certain beliefs, and including human sexuality. That's one of the reasons, I think, why we get, for example, so much hostility from the media. Because I'm often asked when I'm talking to people about persecution of Christians across the world, well, why do you think the media doesn't take any interest? And I think part of the reason is, and certainly here as well, is because we're seen as the bigots. We're seen as the ones who cause the problems because of particularly Catholic teaching on human sexuality. It's in the world of the elites, we're the ones who have the problems.
Yeah, quite. I think this is a story we've covered, or a topic we've covered a lot on this show. Is if you look at the post-war period, and it's particularly look at the sort of founding philosophical fathers like Karl Popper, there was an anti-religion attitude at the end of the Second World War, which is bizarre because Nazism was anti-Christianity, but one of the wrong lessons taken from it was that these kind of myths and these delusions we tell ourselves are evil and they lead to totalitarianism. But they've been, by contrast, highly tolerant of all groups perceived to be minorities, because we've got to be a tolerant society. That sort of seems to me the part of the wrong lessons from 1945 onwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's only one group that you're not tolerant of or allowed to be tolerant of, and that is Orthodox Bible-believing Christians. We're the one group, and that's not feeling sorry for ourselves, but it's reality that tolerance seems to have a certain point where that stops. It's back again to our values stuff, that orthodox with a small o Christianity is not really tolerated by the elites, for sure.
Father Benedict, we've covered a lot of ground. It's been a sweeping conversation of over at least 3, maybe 4 continents. Is there anything that you'd like to bring attention to first in your work, but also anything that we might have missed that you were hoping to talk about?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm very grateful to you, Winston, for covering this, because so many don't. Obviously, I'm a priest, so I always say prayer is a first resort, not a last resort. It's not weak, but Christians should be praying for their brethren, not just once in a blue moon, but regularly. In the Acts of the Apostles, St. Paul, when St. Peter is in prison, there's a great line in the Acts of the Apostles, St. Peter is in prison, and there's a line that says, the church prayed constantly or continually, whatever the translation is. So we should be. That's something we should be doing that perhaps we're not doing enough of. But then, yes, there are other ways of supporting our brethren. My own charity, we do microfinancing to keep Christians in their own country so they don't migrate and stay in their homelands. Other charities do great work. But keeping it current, part of the problem, there was the former EU Commissioner for Religious Freedom, Jan Fiegel, had a great quote. He used to say, ignorance and indifference are allies of evil. Now, you can do something about ignorance. You can learn. Your show could help people learn what's going on. We don't know this. We've never heard this. Well, now you can say, I've heard it. Indifference is another problem. If you're indifferent, there's a real problem. But let's do something about the ignorance.
Yes, I'd forgotten where it is in Scripture, but it's referred to in Dostoevsky's Demons about those who stay on the fence are the greatest sinners of all. But I think it's from Revelation. I forget exactly where in Scripture it is, but
I don't know either, I'm afraid. Sorry.
It's a sort of deep. At least the atheists, they might not be on the fence, but at least they show the respect to God to engage with the problem
and we do, as I said, work together as well. We can have commonality with people who have no. Bill Maher, as you started with, we've got something in union with someone like that, someone who defends us, and in another time we may have to defend him for something. Others, we can work with atheists, non-believers, other people of other faiths, generally not in a squashy, wishy-washy way, but to defend free speech. This is, as you know so well, this is a huge issue for us now in Britain, in Europe. We need to work together to defend that old cliche, but it's true. People have the right to say things we don't like. This is a massive issue, and it's part of religious freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, Father Benedict, a great pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Winston, thank you very much.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show with our guest, Father Benedict Kiely. If you want to support this show and enjoy ad-free viewing and listening, head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk. Over there, you'll also get exclusive content and the opportunity to ask future guests your questions. That's all at winstonmarshall.co.uk. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, be well.